It happened in a heartbeat. One moment, Clara was standing behind the counter of her small coffee shop, pouring tea for a customer. The next, the door slammed open, and two men carried in a bloodied police officer, his uniform soaked crimson. Their voices were frantic, pleading for help, but no ambulance would arrive in time. She didn't hesitate. Her hands moved with a precision she hadn't used in years, pressing into the wound, tearing her own apron to stop the bleeding. Customers stared, frozen, as she knelt on the floor, her knees in the spreading pool beneath him. It didn't matter that she wasn't wearing gloves. It didn't matter that she risked everything. It only mattered that a man's life was slipping away in front of her. By the time paramedics burst in, her shirt was stained, her breathing ragged. But the officer was alive, and by the next morning, Clara had nothing. The police had left, the crowd had gone, and the adrenaline had faded. But her small shop hadn't survived the chaos. Tables overturned, supplies ruined, and worst of all, her landlord had already taped a notice to the door. She was 3 months behind on rent. Now, after losing her husband 2 years ago and her only son to a faraway job she could barely afford to visit, this shop had been her last piece of stability. Clara had been a nurse once. She remembered nights in the emergency room, the metallic smell of blood, the sharp sting of disinfectant, the quiet prayers whispered into her mask. She remembered holding the hands of strangers in their last moments because no one else was there. She remembered walking away from the profession when her husband's illness drained every ounce of her strength. She had built this coffee shop not to forget the past, but to survive it, and now, because she had acted without hesitation, she was left with empty pockets and a padlocked door. That morning, she walked to the shop to collect what little she could carry. She kept her head down as neighbors passed without speaking. Some glanced at her with pity, others with the kind of distant look people have when they don't want to get involved. Her hands trembled as she turned the key in the lock. She stepped inside the hollow space and felt the weight of silence. Then, she heard it, the faint rhythm of boots on pavement. Slow, steady, growing louder. She turned and saw them but a line of uniformed officers stretching down the street, shoulders squared, eyes locked on her. At the front stood the officer she had saved, pale but standing tall. Without a word, they raised their hands, every single one, in a silent salute. The street froze. People stepped out of shops, cars stopped, and in that moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The officer stepped forward, placing an envelope in her hands. Inside was enough money to pay her rent for the year, replace every piece of equipment, and more. He looked at her, his voice low but steady. "You gave me a second chance at life. We're giving you yours back." Tears blurred her vision. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. From that day forward, Clara's coffee shop became more than a business. It became a gathering place for the officers who had stood for her, for neighbors who now saw the quiet courage they had once overlooked, and for strangers who heard the story and came to see the woman who had risked everything without asking for anything in return. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are done in silence, one officer told a reporter later. And sometimes, the world needs to answer that silence with respect. Stories like Clara's remind us that courage doesn't need an audience, and kindness often comes at a cost. But it also comes back when you least expect it. That if this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the quiet heroes walking among us. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that proves the world still has goodness worth fighting for.